US President Donald Trump has launched his latest broadside against South Africa in a social media post directly offering South African farmers and their families safe refuge in the USA and a path to citizenship. Trump posted to Truth Social that South Africa was being terrible to long-time farmers in the country. He again erroneously stated that their land and farms were being confiscated, pushing a misinformed narrative about the country's land expropriation laws. SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joins us now for more on this conversation. Sherwin, thank you so much for your time this evening. It never seems to end, right? First, we heard that executive order from US President Donald Trump about the US aid. Yesterday, it was another executive order when it comes to climate change. And now, this latest one.
Yeah, and we're chasing here, Mbali, a lot of misinformation. And so our role as journalists is also to repudiate sometimes what is emanating from the White House, no less the President of the United States. And of course, one of his most senior advisors in the vein of the South African-born billionaire Elon Musk, right? So let's go through what President Trump has said in this latest attack on South Africa, misinformed as it might be. Quote, South Africa is being terrible to long-time farmers in the country. They're confiscating their land and farms, and much worse than that. A bad place to be right now, and we are stopping all federal funding. Of course, that's not new. That emanated from the executive order he signed in February in Bali. And he continues to go a step further. Any farmer with family from South Africa seeking to flee that country for reasons of safety will be invited into the United States with a rapid pathway to citizenship. That process, he says, will begin immediately. And of course, now as journalists, we are trying to figure out why is it that suddenly out of the blue, right, he's dealing with the war in Ukraine, he's dealing with tariffs against Canada, he's dealing with a plethora of issues on the domestic frontier in the United States. Why suddenly out of the blue is Donald Trump tweeting or texting on social media about South Africa? And one can only, point to the dots that we see on social media from the likes of Elon Musk. I'll give you two examples of posts that we woke up to this morning as well. From Elon Musk in Bali, quote, Starlink is not allowed to operate in South Africa, quote, because I am not black. This is what Elon Musk has said in terms of his endeavor to have operations, to have a license for Starlink in South Africa. Of course, you'll recall he met with President Ramaphosa in New York in September last year, where initial discussions started as to his ability to invest in South Africa, not just in terms of Starlink, but also his Tesla operations, SpaceX operations, and other avenues of exploration in terms of business deals. We garnered from the South African position after that engagement that it was a very positive discussion. They explained South Africa's BEE laws in terms of foreign ownership in South Africa, the 30% that needs to go to previously disadvantaged groups in South Africa. And Elon Musk, according to Vincent Magwenya from the presidency, raised concern that it might be setting a precedent in terms of his Starlink operations in other jurisdictions. But essentially, the conversation was going to continue. They left it on a very positive note. And then, of course, everything devolved into social media and posts on X. Another thing, Mbali, that Elon Musk tweeted about earlier this week in relation to South Africa on Tuesday is, quote, I grew up as English in South Africa, he says, not Afrikaans, and consider myself to be an American, simply an American. That said, what's happening in South Africa is deeply wrong, not what President Nelson Mandela intended at all. So one then begins to sort of connect the dots and say Donald Trump is probably tweeting or posting to Truth Social as a result of the influence and the aspersions being cast on South Africa by no less than Elon Musk. That is the only line that we can draw here. And of course, we've also subsequently heard from Vincent Magwenya in the South African presidency. I'm just pulling up a message he sent me earlier in Bali, and he said, we are not going to partake in counterproductive megaphone diplomacy. We remain committed to building a mutually beneficial bilateral trade, political, and diplomatic relationship with the United States, in particular the Trump administration. Obviously, it must be a relationship that is based on mutual respect and the respect for our independence and sovereignty. And of course, as you have seen the diplomacy, this megaphone diplomacy on social media play itself out, that has not been happening. South Africa's sovereignty and independence is not being respected in the vein in which these messages are being sent, particularly not using diplomatic channels, but choosing instead to use social media as a way of communicating their position.
And Sherwin, as we continue to join, these dots, it seems as if, they are placing mounting pressure on the South African government, but simply placing pressure, it seems, due to the country's BEE laws.
Yeah, and one begins to wonder what the strategy is. Is this about changing South Africa's BEE laws, but using misinformation to make that point? I mean, surely if you are serious about addressing a problem, you want a fact-based discussion so that you can really sort of have building blocks based on, clear evidence, quantitative research, qualitative research. What you are getting here are emotional outbursts that are not based in fact, and then, journalists are expected to chase their tails here in terms of trying to figure out what this might mean. As you well know, there is a long-standing issue between South Africa in terms of South Africa's foreign policy positions, be that in relation to its relationship with Russia, particularly in light of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or South Africa's action against Israel at the International Court of Justice, right? Alleging that Israel is in violation of the Genocide Convention in terms of its prosecution of its military offensive in Gaza. So one begins to then understand that might be the genesis, in part with the positions of Elon Musk, as to why this position has been taken, right? They cast aspersions of the fact that South Africa had meetings with Hamas, but what are you seeing in the United States today? The U.S. government is directly engaging with Hamas in terms of the future release of the remaining hostages in Gaza. You're also hearing that the United States is directly engaging with Iran, right? And South Africa is being criticized similarly for those relationships. So if it's in America's interests, it seems to be okay, and they don't then respect South Africa's independence and sovereignty in terms of determining what is in the best interests of South Africa in that sense. And so that's where the disparity really emerges here.
But Sherwin, how worse can it get for South Africa? I mean, with the cutting of the US aid, I mean, we're already seeing government trying to channel its ways to ensuring that, the healthcare sector is funded in South Africa. How worse can it get for the country?
Well, it would be difficult for me to sort of pontificate about how bad it could get, but it obviously could get worse. And what you are now hearing from the South African government, confirming our earlier reporting here in Bali, is that the South African government is now working on a new trade offer, a bilateral trade offer that they are going to pitch to the Trump administration. We have been reporting that, AGOA is very much imperiled here. This is a president and an administration that has an affinity for bilateral engagement and making a deal that is going to benefit the United States and it sort of indulge the America First ideology, which is essentially what this administration is all about. You see them, the tariffs, the imposition of tariffs. He's talking about reciprocal tariffs on all countries around the world, including South Africa. And you're seeing it begin to play out with countries like Mexico and Canada. And why, there is a great deal of concern about the future of AGOA here is because even between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, right, these three countries in this region here, there are established free trade agreements that were negotiated under the Trump administration during his first term that started in 2016. They renewed a free trade agreement that was signed by Bill Clinton in the 90s. They renewed it under the Trump administration in 2016. And what do you now have in his second term? He is trying to undercut the very trade deal that his administration struck with those two countries in terms of the unilateral decision to impose tariffs on them. So AGOA, in my estimation, based on what you are seeing here, might very well go away. And South Africa is alive to that prospect, and that is why they are looking at different avenues, different explorative means in terms of saying, hey, let's have a new deal here. This is what we are putting on the table. This is what we see as benefit to you. And that, I think, is where we go from here.
All right, Sherwin, thank you so much for that very important update. That is Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent there, just giving us the latest when it comes from the Trump administration, particularly in concern with South Africa.